Ok, perfecto. Vamos a discutirlo hoy.
We have called for warmth. I walked all over and I realized the gal in the kitchen could have just called. Oh, well. One's longer.
Oh, this is a short one? Okay. All right.
Yeah, pretty sure. Oh, oh no, that has a whole big coil. Maybe this one. Unfurl it. Unfurl it.
Yes, that's the longer one. For sure.
When you look to unfurl, you can help pass it around. Okay, all right.
Good morning.
I feel like I'm usurping the seat. Tough. What? Very good. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning. So let me begin with a slight update for Zisel from a question he asked last week, which was Belarus, was the modern country of Belarus part of the Pale of Settlement? And last week I said no, but in further checking on it, there was a small portion of what is today Belarus that was part of the Pale of Settlement from last week, a small part of it. Okay, today we're going for margaritas and salsa. Yay! Yes, of course I did. I have them waiting outside. Margaritas at 10 in the morning, wonderful, right? Yes. It's 5 o'clock somewhere. You got that right. You got that right. I drink like this much, but I will say, if we go out for Mexican, I will have one margarita, because I think they're really delicious. I like the salt. Yes, Melinda. So, dance salsa. Oh, that sounds fun. Salsa and salsa. Very good. Okay. Very good. So, we will start our conversation about Mexico with conversos who end up coming over with conquistador Hernan Cortez in 1519. And he was a Spanish conquistador leading an expedition against the Aztec Empire. And they defeat the Aztecs in 1521. So these conversos in 1519 obviously are fleeing the expulsion from Spain in 1492. And previous to that, they are beginning to flee and beginning to have problems with the Reconquista. So if we remember what the Reconquista is, the Moors take over, the Moors invade and take over. Now let's go over to Europe. Here's Spain, okay? The Moors come up and they take over a lot of Spain. The Palace of Alhambra is down here. So pretty much immediately begins the Reconquista, the reconquering of Spain by Catholic forces. The northern kingdoms here, basically you had the kingdom of Castile and kingdom of Aragon, and Isabella comes from the house of Castile. Ferdinand comes from the house of Aragon. So their marriage unites the two most powerful kingdoms in the north. And over the course from 700 to 1492, the Christianity regains Spain. And the last place to fall is basically in 1492 after the marriage of Ferdinand and Isabella. And so, and then they bring in the Inquisition. Their marriage is a little bit earlier than 1492. But they bring in the Inquisition in 1492. So the Reconquista, the years of the Reconquista, made life not wonderful for the Jews. Of course, the Inquisition makes it absolutely intolerable. But already there had been a climate of tension and problems. So these conversos who come over with Hernán Cortés in 1519 are fleeing that situation in Spain. And the people who came over were both crypto-Jews, conversos, as well as Jews who had completely converted to Catholicism. You know, we sort of lose that group of Jews when we talk about conversos, because we figure, well, all the Jews pretty much, you know, who professed fidelity to Catholicism were in their hearts practicing Judaism still, so they were all conversos. But no, there were a number of Jews who converted to Christianity and who wanted to convert to Christianity, who did fully convert to Christianity and lived their lives completely as Christians. And those people obviously were they had feelings against the conversos because they were now part of the Catholic community. And the church recruited those former Jews to turn in crypto-Jews. And they were rewarded by getting higher positions in the church. And I think that, you know, given our history, what happened in Germany with, we understand that that was quite possible. Quite possible. Yes? Wait, Cecil, you gotta... Or Susie's gonna really come down on me.
Just an aside, the Jews who outwardly converted to Catholicism, but they were really crypto-Jews, were underground. They were not in a very nice way, but they were called marranos. Marrano is actually a pig, and they were called marranos because in order for them to show that they are not Jews, they used to eat very publicly pork. So there comes marrano. There is, now that I have this, there's one.
Now that he's got a captive audience. All right, folks, here we go.
I have a little anecdote. I don't know if it's true, but I read it as true. This converso was at a public meeting, some sort of church or whatever, and he was eating pig. He was eating pork. A little piece of pork fell on the ground, and he, with his boot, stepped on it as he was eating. The Inquisition got him, and he put him to death because he stepped on a piece of pork in defiance of...
Crazy. So the good news is, for these first conversos who come over to Mexico with Hernan Cortez, they lived peacefully in Mexico. The problem begins in 1571. So remember, Cortez comes over in 1519. So basically 50 years later in 1571, the Mexican Inquisition, the Inquisition is brought to Mexico. It is not as hostile in Mexico as it was in Spain and then Portugal, but it was still an Inquisition and still went after conversos. Luckily, in 1606, so we're talking about 35 years later, King Philip III of Spain gives an order to free the conversos who were being held in prison, and he relaxed the rules of the Inquisition. And so more conversos came over. And these new conversos settled in Acapulco, they settled in Veracruz, and they settled in Campeche. So now notice they're all on coasts because these Sephardim were very versed in trading in a mercantile economy. And Veracruz was a very, very important point of entry into Mexico. Yes?
Didn't they also go up into New Mexico?
Didn't they also go up into New Mexico?
Yeah, into that region there.
Into, what was that, Janice? And Arizona and California. Sure, that happens. Not at this time, that happens later, but absolutely they did. Absolutely they did. From 1642 to 1649, so remember, King Philip reverses the order in 1606. It is brought back by his son, Philip IV, and we have the Second Inquisition, and it went mostly after not so much crypto-Jews. It went after instances of blasphemy and moral transgression. So it wasn't religiously based, it was behaviorally based. At the time, most of the Jews were working as shopkeepers and craftsmen. So let's think about this for a second. So it's 1642, 1649, basically 1650. Basically 1650. So this is going on in Mexico. What's going on in Europe? 1650.
Some sort of crusade?
1650 is after the Crusades. So in 1650, many of the Jews were moving to Amsterdam. And Amsterdam became what is called the New Jerusalem at the time. This is the time of Spinoza, the great original Jewish philosopher who is put into Cherem and kicked out of the community there. And so Jews are moving eastward. Just prior to this, there had been an invitation from the nobility in Poland and Lithuania for Jews to move there to start a mercantile economy there. Mercantile meaning an economy that's based on trade and commerce, as opposed to agriculture. All right. So they worked as shopkeepers and craftsmen. Throughout Europe at this time, basically, Jews were excluded from the guilds, like the unions of their time. So they couldn't work as craftsmen or shopkeepers. They were excluded from this. Now, we do have instances where we have the attendance logs of meetings from this time, and there were Jewish names on there. So it wasn't like every single Jew everywhere was excluded from a guild, or history's not nearly that neat. There were some Jews who, in different cities who got on and were working. But by and large, Jews were not permitted to serve in the guilds. So that's what was going on in Europe. Here in Mexico, the Jews are working as shopkeepers and craftsmen. Mexico gains independence from Spain in 1821, and Catholicism is declared the official religion of Mexico shortly thereafter. From 1825 to 1860, there is some immigration from Jews from Poland and Eastern Europe and Germany. So up until this time, it had been almost entirely Sephardic Jews who were coming in. Now, there are some Ashkenazic Jews who are beginning to come in. They are not allowed to become citizens. None of the immigrants are allowed to become citizens. And in 1861, we have our first instance of a document that says the Jews rented a hall for the high holidays, for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and it was the first record of public worship in Mexico at that time. In 1865, Emperor Maximilian I declares an edict of religious tolerance. Now, when I was looking through the histories and looking this up, I said, Emperor Maximilian I? Where was there an empire? Well, to my astonishment, lo and behold, there was a Mexican empire, and he was the emperor of the Second Mexican Empire. I had no idea there was a Mexican empire. He was Habsburg, yes. Absolutely. But there was a Mexican empire.
And that was the time when Pancho Villa, a famous bandit, joined the revolutionary forces of Juarez, who eventually deposed Maximilian, because there was a revolt going on, and farmers with hoes fighting French soldiers, because the French...
Cinco de Mayo celebrates that they kicked him out, this emperor. Yes.
Yeah, yes, these are all very true, and wonderful. I just had no idea that there was an emperor of Mexico, of the Mexican Empire. Okay. From 1864 to 1867, Maximilian invited Jews from France, Belgium, and Austria-Hungary to settle in Mexico. So we had more of an influx now of European Jews, of Ashkenazic Jews. Now, having said all that, the census in 1867 only put 20 Jewish families in Mexico. And it's like, wait a minute, all these conversos came over with Hernan Cortez, and then we had immigration from here, and there were only 20 families? How could that be? Well, apparently there must have been only a handful of Jews who came over with Cortez, a handful of conversos, and the rest of the immigration was very, very, very small. But in the 1880s, there was a very significant wave of immigration. Jewish bankers were invited to come to participate in the Mexican economy. Industrialists from France were invited to come over to bring industrialism into Mexico. Many of them came, established themselves, did well, and then left. The Jewish bankers and the other immigrants stayed. So they came over in the 1880s. And what was the big event, once again, if we can remember, in the 1880s that precipitates all of this migration out of Eastern Europe and Russia and into the Aliyot, to Israel, as well as to the United States, immigration to the United States, and now to Mexico? Yes. Yes, very good. Assassination of Tsar. Yes, Alexander II. The assassination of Tsar Alexander II in 1881 begins a huge movement to get out because of persecution and problems associated with the assassination, which was blamed on Jews at the time, but which we know Jews did not participate in. But the persecution led many, many, many Jews to get out. And they went to Israel, the beginning of the first Aliyot to Israel. They came to the United States. They came to Mexico. And probably half of the Jewish population at that time in Mexico and the descendants thereof now were linked to this wave of immigration in the 1880s. And many of them settled in Mexico City, especially on what was called Madero Street. Madero Street in Mexico City at that time, my understanding was sort of the European fashion capital of that like special street. Yeah, like Rodeo, probably like Rodeo, yeah. And they had, there was another special street where they had like expensive jewelry like Tiffany's. And so the Jews were doing pretty well. And the Jews were able to open their first Jewish cemetery. Now, one thing, of course, that one of the questions that came to my mind was, okay, they've been there since 1519. So where were they being buried? You get the first Jewish cemetery in the 1880s. What was going on? Well, I think the deal is that not only did you have to work it out with your community about having a cemetery, but it had to be approved by the government. And they just simply weren't approved until 1880. But it does beg the question, if Jews need to be buried in a Jewish cemetery, what happened for like 300 years? What were they doing? And as best I can tell, they did the best they could. I'm sure they created a number of burial places for their community, but this was the first designated Jewish cemetery. So, starting in the early 19th century or the 1800s, 20th century or the 1900s, Jews from the Middle East, as well as Sephardic Jews, so Mizrahi Jews and Sephardic Jews, begin to move into Mexico. And many of them come from the Ottoman Empire. Why do they come from the Ottoman Empire? So remember, what ends the Ottoman Empire? Does anyone remember? World War I. Very good. So what happens after World War I is the victors of World War I divide up the territory that had been conquered, right? Which was the Ottoman Empire. So that's how we get the British mandate for Israel. That's how Syria gets France, etc. I mean, how France gets Syria. And so the Ottoman Empire is gone, and it's divided up among the victors of World War I. And that happened when, approximately? 1915, 16, 17, 18, mid-19 to late 19, between 1915 and 1920. Yes. So, yes. Told ya. Told ya.
So my husband's mother's family came to the United States turn of the 20th century about, and she had she had brothers who came later, probably around that time, at the end of World War I, who could not get into the United States. So he has a large extended family in Mexico City. And some went to Cuba also. One of the brothers went to Cuba also. So
Good. And approximately what year was that?
I'm going to say 1920-ish.
Good, good. We're going to talk about that in a minute, why that happened.
Okay, so that was
So that's
Susan.
great. No, continue. That's
I don't
terrific.
really know too much about. I mean, I know that I know that one of his cousins is an architect, and I mean they're very upper middle class, very orthodox. Two of their daughters couldn't find husbands orthodox enough in Mexico.
Wow.
So they went to Israel, and they couldn't find orthodox enough husbands in Israel.
Oy.
So guess where they ended up?
Where?
Brooklyn.
Oh my God.
So so he has two of that family live in the United States.
Thank you, thank you. So by the mid-1900s, the Ottoman Empire is beginning to crumble. And as we've talked about a number of times, how is it that empires cease to exist? Because in the course of Jewish history, we lived under empire, under empire, under empire, under empire. The Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Romans, and then the Greeks in the middle, then the Romans, then and under the Ottomans later. I mean, we just lived under many, many different empires. And what happened to those empires? Remember that as the empire expands, why does it expand? Because it wants more money. It wants to increase its tax base by having more people in other countries paying taxes. So they expand to get more money and more money and more money. Pretty soon they expand so far that the outlying territories are so far away from the center of the empire that the center of the empire loses control over the faraway places. And so little by little, it disintegrates from the outside. And almost always, there are problems in the center as well, in the central government, either people who want to take over and rule the empire, challenges from other people, and so the empire implodes from the middle, and it disintegrates from the outside. And after a while, it becomes weak to the point that another empire, which is just getting started, can come in and take it over. Okay. So the Ottoman Empire had undergone kind of the same situation. The Ottoman Empire was very big, and it was very powerful in its heyday. And it began to expand so far that it began to lose its control over its territories. So these Jews were fleeing from the Middle East, and they were Mizrahi Jews, Middle Eastern Jews, and Sephardic Jews. Because we know that Jews fleeing persecution in Spain and Portugal went to the Ottoman Empire. That was one of the great places that they went to. And what ended up happening in the Ottoman Empire was that Jewish communities began to be majority Sephardic. So many Sephardic Jews came over. This is when Spanish mixes with Hebrew, it mixes with other languages as well, and becomes Ladino. So these communities, the Ottoman Turkish Jewish communities, were speaking Ladino. They had a very strong Sephardic cultural influence on them. So the Jews who left were both Sephardic Jews, and the Ottoman Turkish Empire, part of their possession was present-day Israel and the Middle East. So they had Mizrahi Jews as well. We have the first synagogues, Magen David and Mount Sinai synagogues. And Jews worked mostly as shoemakers, furriers, peddlers, tailors, and they lived in Puebla, they lived in Veracruz, they lived in Chiapas, and then all of them moved eventually to Mexico City. And of course, the moral of the story there is at the end of our presentation day, we're going to find almost all the Jews of Mexico now live in Mexico City. In the year 1900, the census was 134 Jews. Not a lot. So when we say, oh yeah, Jews came from the Middle East, they came from, Mizrahi, I mean, it must have been like 5 Jews from, it couldn't have been a lot because there were only 134 Jews totally in 1900. But between 1900 and 1950, we have an extra 7,500 Jews who are coming to Mexico. And as yes?
Some time ago, I went on a tour of Tijuana.
Oh, good. Tell us
And
about it.
the purpose of the tour was to go through the converso, what they call the converso synagogues. And these were filled with people of various ages, mostly young people with young families. And they said that they had memories. While they had lost the tradition, basically, they had memories of things that their grandparents and great-parents had done, and this brought them back to Judaism. And they have several synagogues there full of, families and seem to be thriving at the time. I'm wondering if that in any way goes back to the people that you're talking about that came over earlier.
And how were those people accepted? Did you find out how those people were accepted or not
Not
accepted?
too well, not too well. I remember they were saying that, I don't know if it was the conservative synagogues didn't really accept them, but they were not accepted too well by,
Great. That should not surprise us as we talk more about Mexico.
Did you ever hear a town named Venta Prieta in Mexico? No. Okay, I don't know exactly where Venta Prieta is. It is, the people there are natives, but they're Jewish. Apparently, some of the conversos may have found their way to Venta Prieta, a small town. Unfortunately, I don't know where it's located, and that town is Jewish.
The whole town.
Yes. There may be some Catholics there, but basically it's a Jewish town.
Venta Prieta?
Yes, Venta Prieta. Prieta.
Venta Prieta. Sí, okay, lo tengo. Okay, hang on one second. I'm finding its location right now. It is just north and a slightly east of Mexico City. So, we have a big Jewish city, Venta Prieta, right there. All right, thanks for that, Cecil. Okay. So, in 1917, yes, Lana. Wait. Oh, can I repeat the question? Oh, okay. Lana says, can I repeat her question so she doesn't have to come up and take the mic? Okay. Maybe that the census numbers are so low is that people didn't want to put on paper that they were crypto Jews. Or, as we're thinking about this now, maybe crypto Jews didn't count in the census as Jews. So when we say, for instance, in 1900 there were 134 Jews, we can say there were 134 certifiable halachic Jews, and then a whole bunch of conversos who recognized themselves as Jews, but the Jewish community didn't accept or recognize yet. So maybe that's why the numbers are so low. That's a really good point. Thanks, Lana. Yes, Janice.
Okay, so it was the case that actually, if you weren't Catholic, they wouldn't let you buy property. So a lot of people had to convert, both in Mexico and in the United States. And that was true for a lot of years. And my information about that actually comes from the deed my parents bought at the house in 1950 in North Hollywood. And the deed said it was only supposed to be sold to Catholics.
Wow.
But of course, we weren't. But if you look, you'll find in Mexico, in the United States, especially in Texas, they had to convert to buy property.
You know, as a very quick aside, we know about the anti-Semitism that was present in this country in the 1950s, for sure. And of course, we're seeing a terrible resurgence right this minute. But we know that it was very prominent in the 1950s. In my city where I live, Burbank, there were signs. No Jews, no blacks in the 1950s. No dogs. And my father wanted to be a doctor. He wanted to go to med school. But there were quotas in med school, and although his grades were excellent beyond, he couldn't get into any medical schools because the quotas eliminated him. So he went to NYU and became a businessman. But his first love was always he wanted to be a doctor, and at the time it was not available to him. They were very strict about it, yes.
I could read when I was very young, and I read the deed of my parents' house, which was about 2.5 miles from here,
Yeah?
and the house was not supposed to be sold to anybody who wasn't Catholic.
Yeah.
But they were ignoring it by then, but that was what was, that
Yeah.
was probably many years where that was true.
Yep. So between 1917 and 1920, there were a number of Jews who came to Mexico from Russia, from Poland, from Lithuania, and from the Balkans. So we have a large Ashkenazic contingent, and we had said that earlier after 1881 and the assassination of Tsar Alexander II. They came through the port of Veracruz. That was as we talked about, was a very important immigration port for entering Mexico. B'nai B'rith was very instrumental in helping these new immigrants adjust and find places. Immigration then slowed after 1929. So basically 1917 to 1929, 12 years, the immigration went pretty well. And then after 1929, it slowed way down. Part of the problem was that many of these immigrants to Mexico used it as a stopover to get into the United States. However, what was the problem with immigration in the United States? Jewish quota, restricted, yes. So in 1924, we have what's called the Johnson-Reed Immigration Act. And the Johnson-Reed Immigration Act restricted immigration into the United States from certain areas. And it didn't specifically name Jews, but the areas from which it restricted immigration had a large Jewish population who wanted to come in. And so the United States and other countries as well in the 1920s, and Mexico is going to be that way very shortly as well, were very concerned about bringing other people in. They wanted to keep it more people like us. And unfortunately, we see that in a lot of places. We're seeing that in different parts of Europe now in a huge way. Some of the right-wing governments, Hungary especially, and others as well. And we're seeing it here. We are seeing it here. And we saw it when we talked about Israel as well.
with the Indian Jews.
And the Indian Jews, yes. You know, there comes a point, and I guess it's understandable, you know, when a majority population begins to feel threatened in some way by a number of people who are coming from somewhere else. I mean, as human beings, I think we can sort of all process that. And then we have to try to think as compassionate, open-minded human beings, what do we do about that? All right, that's way beyond the scope of my job description and way beyond my pay. So,
Apparently, sometime in the 20s, there was a rumor going through Eastern Europe that if you lived in Cuba for 6 months, you could come to the States. It was a rumor, not true. That's how my father landed in Cuba, because 6 months in Cuba, I can come to the States. So he went to Cuba and didn't come to the States until like 1965.
yeah. So a lot of
When
these
I brought him
Jews, so a lot of these Jews went to Mexico in the hope of using it as a stopover and a way to get into the U.S. That was not possible, so they ended up staying in Mexico. And also remember, in 1929, we had the Great Depression. So there were a number of factors in the mid to late 20s that sort of closed off immigration and prevented people from coming here. By 1930, there were about 21,000 Jews in Mexico. Of course, during the 1940s, we had many who were fleeing the Nazis. Luckily, there wasn't a great deal of anti-Semitism in Mexico. But, you know, people at that time were desperate to get out, and they went anywhere that they could get out to. So currently, there are about 90 to 100,000 Jews in Mexico, and 75% of them live in Mexico City, and they are in vast majority descended from these first immigrants that we were talking about earlier in the class. Jews openly serve in the government in Mexico. Probably the greatest threat to the Jewish communities in Mexico, because there's religious tolerance, thank you. Religious tolerance. Tolerism, wow, that's a new word. Good, Mark. The greatest threat to them is intermarriage and and migration out of Mexico to somewhere else. And of course, intermarriage is just a significant problem for Jewish communities everywhere. Not for Orthodox Jewish communities, clearly, because they won't intermarry. But for everyone else, it is a concern, it is a problem, and I think as parents, we know that, we have no control over our children and our grandchildren, whom they fall in love with, and of course, plan A is they marry a Jewish person. That's the best case scenario. Plan B, they fall in love with somebody who's not Jewish, and we say, raise the children Jewish. Okay? If it's a non-Jewish woman, convert the children, raise them as Jews, I'm good, because then we have another generation of Jews. And of course, plan C, the worst case scenario, is they marry a non-Jewish spouse, and the religion goes out the window, and that's the end. And we lose a Jewish family. But we all understand, I think, we get to a certain age, and we realize love. If you find true love in this world, if you really do, you're really lucky. And it's very precious, and grab it. Grab it. If they happen to be Jewish, that's spectacular. But if they don't, try to go to the next best scenario, because you don't want to lose a chance at love. It's too precious in this world. My great aunt was madly in love with a non-Jewish man, and my great grandparents told her, if you marry, you are out of the family, we will never speak to you again. And I always felt it was so tragic. She never dated after that, and she never married her entire life. And I thought, gosh, what a horrible way to have lived your life. She was a wonderful great aunt, and we were very, very, very close, but I just felt sorry for her. So in Mexico today, there are a number of different synagogues, mostly divided along Ashkenazic and Sephardic lines. And there are what do I have here? Mostly Orthodox and conservative synagogues. There are 2 liberal synagogues in Mexico. But by and large, Jews in Mexico belong to either an Orthodox synagogue or a conservative, or don't belong to a synagogue at all. But if they do, they are of traditional practice. A number of years ago, my very good friend, Rabbi Steve Finley, was rabbi of a conservative congregation in Mexico City. And he flew me down probably 3 times. I served on the Beit Din to do conversions in Mexico City. So mostly Orthodox and conservative, which would explain why, who was it? Yes, which would explain why they couldn't find, I don't know why they couldn't find someone Orthodox enough, I mean, but.
Well, they're very insular group.
Yes, very, yes. Yeah. There are over 20 traditional synagogues in Mexico City, and there are 12 Jewish schools in Mexico City. And so I would say that based on my research, the sort of the most interesting statistic is that the some in the Jewish community are working pretty actively to try to find legitimate crypto-Jews and convert them back to Judaism. It's controversial, obviously, within the Jewish communities. But I think as who was talking about the gosh, my memory. I hate getting old. The synagogues in Mexico that had a lot of crypto Jews, right? Yes. Yeah, that I think that is a endeavor within the Jewish community to seek out crypto Jews and convert some within the Jewish community to seek out crypto Jews and convert them formally into Judaism.
This is not about Mexico, but Prague, Czech Republic, where I'm from. There was a lot of intermarriage during First Republic, after between the wars, and then the remaining Jews who survived the Holocaust, they just intermarried again, and in like last 30 years, there is a lot of young people who have some heritage, Jewish heritage, and they convert or try to convert, which is very difficult, to Judaism, to become Jews.
Great. Okay, Zisol, final comment.
Just a little story about Jews in Mexico. That's
Okay.
all. I was in the United States Coast Guard, and I was trying to get my father out of Cuba, and one avenue was through Mexico. So I went to Mexico City to try to arrange for passports and whatnot. I was warned by a friend of mine, he's Mexican. He died already, but anyhow, he was Mexican, living here in the States. And he said, look, there is kind of a disproportionate ratio between men and women in Mexico. There are more women, Jewish, we're talking about Jewish women and men. So, you might get asked to marry. So he warned me. Okay, I met some of the Jewish families there while I'm trying to transact the business with the American Embassy in Mexico. And this gentleman invites me to his home. And I walk in the door, and hello, how are you? And the first thing out of his wife was, do you want to get married? And I was like, marriage was not in my mind at the time, but so I gasped, well, no, I don't know. I didn't get married many years later.
Wow. Okay, everyone, it is 10 of. Let's have our break now. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful, I guess we have a 2-week break now. So have a wonderful last couple of days of Hanukkah and a last holiday season in the last couple of weeks, I guess. With everybody is celebrating whatever they celebrate. So, and we'll see you after the new year. Wonderful. Congratulations.
could. I don't blame you. We are too. We're in our zone. Take your time. So you drove right all the way down to that?
Well, no, actually, fifth day, but it's 6 nights. Yeah. She said, because I said I went up with the police. So I went up, said, Most likely, yes, most likely. I'll grant you.
So hopefully we will. I'm going to be meeting with Barbara Bressler this afternoon at my house. Look at some of my crafts things too. But I think we're on target. Okay. Hello.
Hello, hello. Acapulco, whoa.
Not that Acapulco.
Good morning, I'm drawing a Chanukiah. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. It's good to see you at home and here. We're getting ready. We're getting ready for a couple of weeks of rest and relaxation. But I just had some rest and relaxation, so I can't be greedy about it. So welcome, let's do the blessing for learning. And today we're going to focus on Hanukkah. Interesting texts, I think, and we'll catch it before Hanukkah is over. So let's join together. Baruch atah Adonai
Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So nice to see everybody. I'm assuming that what will happen is that Susie will send those of you who are at home the materials that we're using, but I thought it might be fun today to take a look at the holiday of Hanukkah. So somebody tell me the story of Hanukkah as though you were telling it to a child or a grandchild, or anybody want to give it a try?
Once upon a time, okay, once upon a time again,
A brief overview of
there were some very bad people that conquered others, and the conquered people just didn't like it because they couldn't practice their own religion. So the oppressed people revolted, and they were able to rescue the temple. And in the temple, they were able to light the holy lights. But it needed to be a special type of oil that was not contaminated. And they found one little jar or cruse of oil, and it hardly was going to be even a day. And they lit the holy light, and lo and behold, the little flask of oil was able to last for 8 days. And thereby we have the holiday of Hanukkah.
Excellent. A miracle. Thank you. Perfect. Okay, so now we are going to learn where that story came from. And as they used to say on some of the rest of the old-time radio shows, but that's not the whole story. And it's not because Cecil did anything wrong. He did it perfectly, but still. So what I want to start with is something that I think is a little bit of fun, which is, of course, the common arguments between the rabbis. And some of you will be very well aware of this, and for some of you this might be new, but I think that for all of this, it's fun. So So let's start with the lighting of the Chanukiah. That's why I put it up here, my beautiful Chanukiah, right? So, and that's a beautiful one that you have a picture of it. So we're going to take a look, flip the page, because we have two texts here. And the first text is what was taught in a Baraita. Anybody remember what a Baraita is in the Talmud? Wait, 1 second. Well, hold on. Yes, go ahead, Candace. Yeah, a commentary. Do you want to add to that? Okay, so it's a commentary that probably came from another text that was lost and that was then implanted into the text. So this is a Baraita. So would you like to read it? The first paragraph?
The sages taught in a Baraita, the basic mitzvah of Hanukkah
is each day to have a light kindled by a person, the head of the household, for himself and his household. And the Mahadrin, i.e. those who are meticulous in the performance of mitzvot, kindle a light for each and every one in the household. And the Mahadrin, min ha-Mahadrin,
The meticulous, above meticulousness. Go on.
who are even more meticulous, adjust the number of lights daily.
Okay, thank you. So what we have here from the Gemara in a Baraita, does that look anything like what we do? So what they have is, okay, head of household. We know that that's not gender driven now, but they're saying the head of the household, whoever it is, has a light kindles that for himself and for his household, and then just one. That person can kindle just one light every day. And if they are even better at it, they have a Chanukiah for everybody in the household and kindle one light. That means the light of the day. So in other words, if it's day one, you do this. If it's day two, you do this. If it's day three, okay? Got it? Okay. If you are meticulous, you do this for each person in your household. And the even more meticulous, in other words, the one who's the most concerned, that person will do one. Okay? And they'll do it for every member of their household. So for those of you who have a Chanukiah collection, when you have more than one person in your house, according to this, you set out more than one Chanukiah. That's text number one. Text number two is about Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai. What a wonderful opportunity to talk about them again. And when you read the second paragraph, I'm going to be bossy today about paragraph reading.
Well,
Go
Beit
ahead.
Shammai and Beit Hillel disagree as to the nature of that adjustment. Beit Shammai say, on the first day one kindles 8 lights, and from there on gradually decreases the number of lights until on the last day of Hanukkah he kindles 1 light. And Beit Hillel says, on the first day one kindles 1 light, and from there on gradually increases the number of lights until on the last day he kindles 8 lights.
Okay? We got the argument. You may have heard this argument before. The argument for Shammai is what? Start out with 8 and then go 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And Hillel says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Why did Hillel win besides the fact that Hillel always wins? What? What? Right.
So I have another thing. You started doing it in the Hebrew alphabet from your Aleph, and you work over to farther into the alphabet.
Oh.
That's my own explanation.
Oh, sorry. Start with the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet and move up Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, like that?
Right. And then how you, and when you turn, that's how you put them in the Hanukkah. And then when you're working in the Hanukkah, you work
Oh, when you're lighting the
When you're lighting,
Hanukkah.
you do it in the English alphabet. You put them in from the Hebrew
Oh, I
alphabet.
see what you're
you
saying.
put 'em
That's true. That's true. I
that's
never
my-
knew the alphabet part.
That's my own alphabet. That's
Okay.
my only alphabet.
So that's true. You put in the candles, 1, 2, 3, 4. What are we today? 5, 6, 7. It'll be 7 tonight. And then, so you put them in like that, and then when you light it, you light the newest one first. So why did Hillel win? Hillel won because of the obvious fact that on the last day of Hanukkah, then you have all the lights. You see the wonder and the majesty of the whole holiday. But in reality, Shammai was probably right. And this is why. Because if you go by the rabbinic idea that you got a little tiny tube, whatever glass tube or ceramic tube it was, of purified oil that you found in the temple, what will happen as you use that oil? It gets to be less. So if you have the miracle that happened, according to the Gemara, where they found this precious purified oil in this destroyed structure of the temple, maybe Shammai was correct. For us to see the miracle as it gets less and less and less, but it lasts to do that last day. So there's this whole discussion about it. But Hillel, we do it Hillel's way, which means that when we light tonight, we will put candles in all of here, and we will light, and leave it all like that. So I thought that you would find these texts interesting, but even if you've learned the Hillel and Shammai text, you probably didn't see the Baraita before that there were other ways that they did it too. However, folks, this document is the rabbinic document that comes out of the Talmud. If you take a look at the real story of Hanukkah, you will find out that there is no miracle discussed in any of it. The other interesting thing about it is that the whole story of Hanukkah, which we're going to take a look at today in Maccabees, many of you may already know that that entire document is not in any Jewish text. It started actually as a Jewish text, but probably because of the dating involved in it, it never made it into what they call the canon, meaning the Torah, the prophets, or the writings. You know what did slide in, though? Purim. Purim slid in to the canon, so we have that. If you're looking, you'll find Song of Songs, you'll find Ecclesiastes, you'll find you'll find Jonah that we read on Yom Kippur, and you'll find Esther. But you're not going to find any Maccabees at all. Yes? Here.
I understand, I didn't come up with it. I read it somewhere, okay? And I liked it. That's why I mentioned it. Back in the Middle Ages, I assume, or sometime in which it was bad for Jews in the world, especially Europe, the story of Hanukkah, essentially, if you break it down, is a military victory.
We're getting there, so I'm not going to let you do that. But he's right. So what we're going to take a look at, sorry, Cecil, but I'm going to defer to the book of Maccabees so that we can do this. But we're going to take a look at it now, which is that he's absolutely right. We're talking about a military victory. So before we get into the book of Maccabees, thank you, I want to find out from you, why did the rabbis do this when there really was none of this miracle in the actual story of Hanukkah? You want to say something about that? I can't get this as far as you would.
They weren't too keen on the military aspects of this.
Don't go too far into the text, because we're going to do the text. And
okay.
I stopped Cecil, so I have to make sure that I'm fair.
And I suppose the climate of being under other, being oppressed, it would not look favorable to be talking about military victories, so that's the other aspect, I think.
Okay. Yes, thank you. So for the rabbis, who does it have to be about? God. It has to be about God. But the story that we have that was originally a Jewish text just isn't about God. So by the time you get past those initial stories into the 1st century through the 6th century of the Common Era, then what you've got is a focus, a religious focus. And all of us, because Cecil told the story so beautifully at the beginning, we've all heard that story. We all grew up with that story. If anybody gets asked what's Hanukkah about, it'll be about Antiochus and taking over the temple and destroying everything, and the proud Maccabees coming forward, and the oil. It's all about the oil. But it's not, as you have well said. So I'm going to distribute to you the sources, and we're going to spend a little bit of time on this. You might find out one that has my notations on it, and if that's the case, yeah. Give it back. If that's the case, now here it is. Okay. So what we're going to be reading before you go into this is called the Apocrypha material. And apocryphal material consists of books that were composed by ancient Jews, but are now basically owned by the Catholic Church. The Christian Bibles and the Catholic Bibles are the ones that preserved these texts to this day, which is really strange. And so what we're going to take a look at were things that were actually written by us. I have a couple of different sources for you that we're going to take a look at, but we're going to start with 1 Maccabees and just kind of work our way through the text a little bit and then talk about what we see. And in this way, folks, we may not be able to claim this text back as part of the Hebrew Bible. It's not. It's way past adding text to it. But we can reclaim it as ours because it's very interesting what they say in these texts. So if it's okay with you, I am just going to point to you, and you're going to, unless you have a desire not to read. So would you read the first paragraph?
Early historical sources, 1 Maccabees.
This is the first book of Maccabees. There are 4. Go ahead.
Okay, and where does this appear?
You can get them. They're published. I have one, but it was held by Christianity, or else we probably wouldn't have this
Amazing.
story
Okay.
today.
Chapter 4 of this important historical work describes the celebration of the Kislev thusly.
What is Kislev? It's the month in which Hanukkah occurs. Good.
Then said Judas and his brothers, "Behold, our enemies are crushed. Let us go up to cleanse and dedicate the sanctuary." So all the army assembled and went up to Mount Zion. There they saw the sanctuary desolate, and the altar profaned, and the gates burned up, and the shrubs growing in the courts as in a forest, or as one of the mountains. They also saw the chambers of priests in ruins. They rent their clothes and made great lamentation and cast ashes upon their heads and fell down flat to the ground upon their faces. And when the signal was given with the trumpets, they cried toward heaven. Then Judas appointed certain men to fight against those that were in the fortress until he had cleansed the sanctuary. He chose blameless priests devoted to the law. They cleansed the sanctuary and removed the defiled stones to an unclean place. They consulted what to do with the altar of burnt offerings, which was profaned, and thought it best to pull it down, lest it should be a reproach to them, because the heathens had defiled it. So they pulled it down and laid up the stones in the mountain of the temple in a convenient place, until there should come a prophet to show what should be done with them.
Okay, so this particular temple was destroyed, thank you, in 586 BCE, so 586 before the year 1. Now they are able to come back to restore the temple. So what do they need to look at to be able to restore the temple that you saw in this paragraph? What did they need to do? They had to clean it up. But there are you know what they did in the temple. What did we do in the temple before it was destroyed? We did sacrifices. So that's why we have an altar there, right? So part of the fact is that they are going in here, and what are they doing with the altar?
Getting rid of it.
They have to get rid of it because of the fact that they sacrificed all sorts of treif meat on the altar. But I think it's kind of funny that we have Hanukkah where the first thing they do when they're able to win is go into the temple and revitalize it and get rid of the altar so that they can give offers again. Well, let's talk Pesach. On our Seder plate, do we have anything that recognizes the sacrifices made in the temple? Yeah, we have an egg, well, that's one of them, and the shank bone. I have always wondered, based on the book of Maccabees, why we aren't having celebratory lamb chops. I'm being facetious, but I'm really not. Because the first thing, the thing that was really important to them, and this is actually a religious thing, isn't it?
Like they roasted the lamb.
But on Pesach,
Why don't we roast some lamb on Pesach? I always wondered about
the Sephardic Jews do, actually.
My mother did too.
Yeah.
Even though she doesn't.
So, but I'm not trying to be flippant about it. But if you read this paragraph, does it seem religious to you in any way?
Yeah, I mean, he's talking about priests and cleansing the sanctuary.
Right, finding good priests,
Yeah,
blameless priests, and cleansing the whole sanctuary. And yet, when we observe Hanukkah, we don't have anything about that. Did you want to?
I have a question. You mentioned that this was the temple destroyed in 586, but the Hanukkah story, I understand, takes place in 165 BCE. So So that it's not exactly the same temple that was destroyed, because they did come back and rebuild.
They rebuilt the temple. Correct, thank you. I appreciate the correction. Do we have, what I guess I really meant to say is when we had the destruction of the first temple and we came, sorry, I got off of my track. We came to rebuild it. We went through a very similar process that we're seeing the Maccabees do here. We don't have texts of the rebuilding of that temple, but we do have from here when they're trying to put it back together and reclaim it. So the entire temple building was not destroyed by Antiochus's armies. Or, yes.
We just mentioned the name of the one that is Nebuchadnezzar.
Yeah, Nebuchadnezzar, yes. So they didn't completely destroy it, so we didn't have to build it from the ground up, but we had to rededicate it. So when you rededicate it, you go through this process that we don't have a lot of things written about, but we have it here, and we observe none of it. So let's go on a little bit. Who wants to read? Well, let's try this. Okay. One of you want to read? Thank you for the correction, Joette. I appreciate it.
Then they took unhewn stones according to the law and built a new altar like the former. They rebuilt the sanctuary and the interior of the temple and consecrated the courts. They made also new holy vessels, and into the temple they brought the candlestick and the altar of burnt offerings and of incense and the table. And upon the altar they burned incense, and the lamps that were upon the candlesticks they lit, that they might give light in the temple. They set the loaves on the table, and hung up the curtains, and finished all the works which they had undertaken.
Okay, stop right there for a minute. I'll use this one, you can hold that one. Anything about oil? Nothing about oil, but what do we see? What do we see in that paragraph? So once again, the whole structure of the temple was not destroyed. It had just been defiled. They go in, they basically cleanse the whole thing, and what have they done in this paragraph? They put back all the holy pieces in what kind of form? What do we see when we look at this?
The new altar like the former.
Yeah, but look at, besides the incense, okay? What do we have? We have candles, but no oil. What else do we have sitting there on that table, folks?
Loaves of bread.
Challah? What else do we have? Besides the bread,
Incense.
we don't have a menorah. What do we have? Candlesticks. So basically, they have put that whole the whole temple that they go into, they cleanse it, they purify it, and they make it Shabbos. I mean, it wasn't Shabbos, but they do what we now emulate when we observe Shabbat. That's the way that the table in the temple looked. That's what we now do. So once again, we've got the redoing of the temple as it is reclaimed, and we're going to get Hanukkah out of it, but it doesn't look like Hanukkah, does it? Not yet.
So archaeologically, one of the oldest symbols that has ever been, Jewish symbols that has ever been found is the 7-branched menorah. So
That's correct.
is
correct.
that what this is?
Is that what these lightings are? No, these are candlesticks. They are not the seven-branched menorah. The 7-branched menorah is what we will use as the symbol later on, and is definitely in the temple, but it is not what they're putting on what they call the showbread, the showbread, the offering that's in the temple. So let's go on a little bit and see what we find. Let's see. Who didn't read yet? Who wants to read? I'll get you two, Cecil.
Early in the morning, on the 25th day, it's funny the way they put that, on the 25th day of the 9th month, which is called the month Kislev, in the 148th year, they rose up and offered sacrifice according to the law upon the new altar of burnt offerings, which they had made.
Okay, what is Kislev, the 25th day of the 9th month, Kislev, what is that?
Christmas?
The first night of Hanukkah. It's the first night of Hanukkah in the month of Kislev, which is what we're in now. And we'll hear more about that, but that's the first day that they were able to reuse the temple.
They didn't know it was 148 BCE at the time. I don't know when this was written.
This is written in the first book of Maccabees as the 100.
I know. But there were, I am finding this interesting because not until 585 CE did somebody come up with the idea of before Christ or after Christ. There was a monk in England.
It's actually in the text.
I know, it's fine. I find this.
It's possible that Christianity messed with it, but I don't know.
It could be the 148th year of that,
Of the dynasty.
whoever was ruling over the land.
It could be.
That would make some sense.
But also, these books have been held for quite a while, but I've never read anything about them being messed with. No, this one is word for word, or pretty much word for word. Okay, go on.
At the very season and on the very day that the Gentiles had profaned it, it was dedicated with songs and harps and cymbals.
Okay, there you go. They did count what was the day that was the destruction of the temple, and they created the holiday to begin on the same day. They did that deliberately once they had cleansed the temple. Go on.
Then all the people fell upon their faces, worshiping and praising the God of heaven, who had given them good success. And so they kept the dedication of the altar 8 days, and offered burnt offerings with gladness, and sacrificed the sacrifice of deliverance and praise. They also decked the forefront of the temple with crowns of gold, and with shields, and the gates and the chambers they renewed, and hanged doors upon them. Thus was there great joy among the people, for that the disgrace of the Gentiles was put away.
Okay?
More?
So there's one more little paragraph.
Moreover, Judas and his brothers, with the whole congregation of Israel, ordained that the days of the dedication of the altar should be kept in their season from year to year for 8 days, from the 25th day of the month Kislev, with joy and gladness.
So why do we observe Hanukkah for 8 days based on the text from 1st Maccabees? It's down at the bottom of that paragraph that starts early in the morning. What is it? They dedicated the altar. For 8 days, they did burnt offerings, and they sacrificed, and they offered praise, and then Judah said,
Let's do it every year.
let's do this every year.
But it doesn't say why 8 days.
No, because there's nothing in this text about the oil. Nothing. So now we're going to go on to 2nd Maccabees, and in 2nd anybody else have any comments here that you want to make about what we are seeing in the actual text?
I was going to say, but it's in 2nd Maccabees.
Okay.
I think that number 8 is important in Jewish tradition. It's the Brit Milah Day.
Oh, 8 is important in the Jewish tradition because it is the day of the Brit Milah. That's possible. So now we're going to get to 2nd Maccabees, and in this text, we have to remember that this happens where? All of this is happening where? In the temple in Jerusalem. And there are many Jewish communities that are very far afield from that. Even when you say Egypt, Egypt is doable, but it is not very close by. So it's very hard to get the information about the fact that this is even able to have happened with Judah and his sons and all the people who joined together to try and win back and succeeded in winning back their temple. So this is part of a letter that is in 2nd Maccabees going out to people in further away Jewish communities. So I think I'll read this one if that's okay. Anybody else want to? Well, you want to read Cecil's.
Letter exhorting the Jews in Egypt to observe the relatively new festival. Since on the 25th day of Kislev, we shall celebrate the purification of the temple, we thought, I can see well, thank you. We thought is necessary to notify you in order that you also may celebrate the Feast of Booths and the Feast of the Fire, the Feast of the Fire given when Nehemiah, who built the temple and the altar, offers sacrifices.
Okay, so let's stop there for a minute. When we get to this text, we find out that one of the things that really was important to the people who redeemed the temple is that when all of these things happened to them, they missed out on a particular holiday. The particular holiday that they missed was Sukkot. So we now get to the point where we see that one of the reasons that we end up with Hanukkah going for a number of days, 8 includes Sukkot plus what was for them Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah. So they are trying to replicate, to be able to reclaim traditions in a way that includes those that they were not able to experience. So one of the reasons that we celebrate Hanukkah for 8 days is because they are hearkening back to what was denied them. Does that make sense to you? Yes. So that's what we have there. And also, Nehemiah built the temple and the altar, offered sacrifices, and so they want them to recognize that they should be offering through the celebration of a holiday no matter where they are located. Keep going.
It happened that on the same day on which the sanctuary had been profaned by the foreigners, the purification of the sanctuary took place. That is, on the 25th day of the same month, which was Kislev, and they celebrated it for 8 days with rejoicing in the manner of the Feast of Booths, remembering how not long before, during the Feast of Booths, they had been wandering in the mountain and caves like wild animals. Therefore, bearing ivy-wreathed wands and beautiful branches and also fronds of palm, they offered hymns of thanksgiving to him who had given success to the purifying of his own holy place. They decreed by public ordinance and vote that the whole nation of the Jews should observe these days every year.
Okay, so we've got Sukkot, because now we have palm branches and things that they're supposed to be carrying that are replicating the Feast of Booths, but also Hanukkah. Also traditions that we do not do any longer. And then then now we get back to the religious part. They sing hymns of thanksgiving to who? God. Even though it's not capitalized in this text, they are talking about God. So when we take a look at what they're telling Egypt to do, it is their experience of how to observe Hanukkah without the temple in Jerusalem, because people don't necessarily live next to the temple in Jerusalem. But does it look like Hanukkah to you? Not yet. All right, so now we get to Philo of Alexandria, and we see the issue with being far away. So could somebody else read that Philo of Alexandria portion?
Philo of Alexandria, the historian completely omits any mention of Hanukkah. Had the holiday fallen into disuse during these very turbulent times? Or more likely, had it not taken hold in Egypt despite the exhortations of 2 Maccabees? Or was the omission a result of political concerns or personal religious leanings?
So it's not Philo who's writing this, it's a commentary, and the commentary is, okay, they sent this letter to Egypt. Philo is in Alexandria, a huge Jewish community, and yet what we learn is that even after this goes out and says, hey, we did it, let's party, they don't say a thing about it in Alexandria. It takes a while for that information to get spread about in a way that creates belief and also political security. Because for people in Egypt who are not living in their own land, the reclaiming of the temple by Jews, they might be a little bit afraid of in terms of how their government, their royalty will react to Jews taking control once again of their temple. Yes?
I think this particular reason. It's quite prevalent in Jewish history. Because Jews were not in their own country, were spread throughout, it was physically dangerous for Jews to celebrate a victory.
Yes. So that's maybe what's happening, although the commentator says it's probably because they didn't get the information yet. So we don't know. It could be any of those things. Now we get to the famous Josephus, who writes about things that are going on in the Jewish world. And it's possible, it says here in a notation, that what he writes is very similar to the first book of Maccabees, and he probably had that source. So would somebody read that? Thank you.
Now Judas celebrated the festival of the restoration of the sacrifices of the temple for 8 days, and omitted no sort of pleasures thereon. But he feasted them upon very rich and splendid sacrifices, and he honored God, and delighted them by hymns and psalms. Nay, they were so very glad at the revival of their customs, when after a long time of intermission, they unexpectedly had regained the freedom of their worship, that they made it a law for their posterity that they should keep a festival on account of the restoration of their temple worship for 8 days. And from that time to this, we celebrate this festival and call it Lights. I suppose the reason was because this liberty beyond our hopes appeared to us, and that thence was the name given to that festival.
Okay. So now this is Josephus talking about it. Obviously, it's going beyond Jerusalem at this particular point. He's got the document, he's got the message, he's putting it out there. Now we get to a very fun part. In Pesikta Rabbati, which is a commentary, you'll see it at the bottom. It's midrash. These are stories that come about because of the texts that we have. So therefore, would somebody read both of these chapters, chapter 6 and chapter 2 of Pesikta Rabbati, and we'll see a little bit more Hanukkah.
At Hanukkah, we commemorate the dedication of the temple by the Hasmoneans who fought and defeated the Hellenists, and we kindle lights just as when we finished the tabernacle in the wilderness.
Okay, so we're being reminded that it was the Hasmoneans, the Maccabees, the family that started and fought, and people got together and defeated the Syrian Greeks, which is what we have there, and we kindle lights. So go on to chapter 2, though. This is funny.
Why do we kindle lights on Hanukkah? Because when the sons of the Hamoshians, the high priest, defeated the Hellenists, they entered the temple and found there 8 iron spears. They stuck candles on them and lit them. That's okay.
That is the historical reason, one of the historical reasons for the lighting of. Yes.
Oh, that is fun.
Anybody have anything you want to make of that? Now, the reason that I'm bringing this to you is because we all learned the same thing when we were children. We all did. Because what's happened in Jewish life naturally is that when one document comes after another document, and particularly when the document that tells the historical story of the holiday doesn't actually retain itself in Jewish texts, what you have then is the response of the rabbis, because Talmud is all rabbinic response. The rabbis mourn when the Second Temple is destroyed under the hand of the Romans. They mourn it. However, that opens up an entirely different opportunity, that destruction of the temple, that leads to the Judaism that we have today. The Judaism that we have today is not based on offerings or candles that we light in the temple. It's not based on any of those things. We don't even have a temple anymore. And many would say it's probably a better idea that we don't live under a sacrificial system with the priesthood any longer. We still acknowledge it. But what we do live by is what happened when all of these things changed, which is the scholarship, the learning, the synagogue experience, and the prayer that comes when there's no longer a temple for the Jewish people any longer. We are who we are because we changed. And we didn't change by ourselves, and it was a disaster. In the Talmud, you see rabbis sitting by the ruins of the Second Temple, distraught. How will we ever live? Where will we live? What will we do? But because we don't have these things that they are celebrating as the rededication of the temple, and we have this, I mean, this is a representation of the development and growth of Jewish life, rather than the mistake that we don't do things right because look at the real texts. We grew into something different, and that's what we have. But it's really important for us to know what came out originally. That's crucial. We can continue to tell grandchildren, great-grandchildren, whoever we want, stories that come from the Gemara about the miracle of the oil, because it's part of the beauty that they created of actually getting back a temple, actually being able to clean it up, actually being able to rebuild it, actually being able to once again sing hymns there. But it's not the way we live our Jewish life, but we should always know about it. So now we do. Spears are cool, right? So next time you know a little person who wants to get themselves or make themselves a new Hanukkah, why don't you say, how about spears? Very cute that you want to put cupcakes on the top of that. So I just want to also do Avodah Zarah. Avodah Zarah is do we have any time? Sure, yeah, but what time is it? Oh, poo. Okay. So all I want to let you know is that they're very aware of the holidays and festivals of people who are idolaters. They live in the middle of them. And so the Mishnah talks about all of these things. And they say, interestingly enough in the Gemara, the holiday of Kalenda, an idolater's holiday, is on 8 days following the winter equinox. Saturnalia is on 8 days preceding the equinox. So what they're saying is we have an 8-day holiday as well, and we have a challenging holiday before and a challenging holiday afterwards. And then they go on in the Gemara, which is brilliant because we are aware of this, And they say when Adam was in the land, it was in Eden, and the days got shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter, what did Adam do? He got terrified. Because in the same way that when you have a day turn to night and you don't know if day is coming up again, when he first experienced the days going shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter and darker and darker and darker, he thought, this is it. It was nice being here in the Garden of Eden, but it's over. But then he observes the winter equinox and sees that days are once again getting longer and longer and longer. And the rabbis put that in there because they have an understanding that all these different holidays happen because of the hope for what? Light. Exactly. But Hanukkah has a different, they're trying to tell us that Hanukkah also has a different part to it. It's not just about fear of darkness that comes from it being a shorter day. It comes from fear of darkness when we allow people to conquer us, to shut down our religious tradition, and we don't fight back. So the light of Hanukkah that we sing lovely songs about, and people think's all peace and, winter songs, are also reminders to all of us to never, ever, ever give up and let the darkness take control. So that's why I put that Avodah Zarah there for you, because they were brilliant that way. So last thing, Megillat Ta'anit, and then Shabbat 21b. Now we have Shabbat 21b, and Megillat Ta'anit. Why did the rabbis make Hanukkah 8 days? Because the Hasmoneans entered the temple and erected the altar and whitewashed it and repaired all the ritual utensils, and they were kept busy for 8 days. And why do we light candles? Because when the Hasmoneans entered the temple, there were 8 iron spears in their hands, and they covered them with wood and lit candles on them. This they did on each of the days. We have that all the way up to a Megillah about Ta'anit is about fasting. But now we get to our closing one. So who will read Shabbat 21b? Anybody not read yet? Okay, I'm going to zip it off to you. What is the reason for Hanukkah? Ma'i Hanukkah. They start right. Why it is the reason for Hanukkah? For our rabbis taught on the 25th of Kislev commence the days of Hanukkah, which are 8, on which a lamentation for the dead and fasting are forbidden, which means happy holiday. For when the Greeks entered the temple, they defiled all the oils therein, and when the Hasmonean dynasty prevailed against and defeated them, they made search and found only 1 cruse of oil, which lay with the seal of the high priest, sealed, but which contained sufficient for 1 day's lighting only. Yet a miracle was wrought therein, and they lit the lamp for 8 days. The following year, these days were appointed a festival, and with the recitation of Hallel, blessings of joy, and thanksgiving are said. But it isn't until the Gemara. So we're talking of at least this 3rd century of the Common Era, folks, that we learn about the oil. There. Oh, you don't have it? Maybe I didn't give you that one. I have it. If you want it, you can take a different text. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so I think that is, the revolt was actually against the Syrians, we call them the Hellenists because they were Greek-inspired. And Antiochus Epiphanes was their king. So the term Greek is used very loosely because the Seleucid Empire was part of an older empire founded by Alexander the Great of Macedon. And it was a reaction that they say, when they say the Greeks, it was a reaction against the Hellenization of the Jews, which Judah Maccabeus and his sons and all of the Hasmoneans who fought were very against the assimilation that was happening in their area. So that's why when you hear Greek or Syrian Greek, it's the force of Hellenization that they're talking about, not the actual conquerors at that time. So that's it. Did you get anything that was interesting from? So if somebody wants, I have, hold on. Where is it? I have other texts that have what I just read to you here, in case anybody wants that. What does yours say at the front? Why, does it say why is Hanukkah observed for 8 days? No. Okay. But you have everything in the texts, including a very brief one according to the Apocrypha, and you have many stories here. So if you want to keep it, yeah. If you want to keep it. And that's it for today. And I appreciate the corrections. I think my mind is still in Maui.
I just want to mention that my family in Israel is very connected to Hanukkah because my sister of blessed memory lived on a moshav in the area where this story took place. The name of the moshav is Matityahu, which is Mattathias, the head of the Maccabee family. And across the road is an area called Hashmonaim, which is the Hasmoneans, and it's very close to the town of Modi'in, which is where this all happened. So we have a physical connection to that place.
So thank you to Matityahu, to Mattathias, to Judah, to all the sons, to all the people who gathered people together, because we get to observe 2 more nights of Hanukkah. But I would really like it if you're still standing here, if we could sing Hatikva before we go. Because after all, the story of Hanukkah is now our story in many different ways. So, Kol od balevav penima nefesh Yehudi homia ufate mizrach kadima ayin litzion Sophia od lo avda tikvatenu hatikva shnotapayim liotam chovshi be'artzenu eretz Zion Yerushalayim liotam chovshi be'artzenu eretz Zion Yerushalayim. If you like studying Talmud, not all of this obviously, or most of it wasn't Talmud, but I teach a class on Shabbat morning, usually at 1 o'clock after services on the Jerusalem Talmud. So join me if you're interested. Have a great week.
ceasefire now. Yeah.
How many of them were there?
Oh, you're welcome. Hope it was a very happy.
So now everybody's going to think those horrible Jews, they blocked the highway.
Yes.
And blame us instead of those stupid people. We try so hard not to block anything. You're welcome. Have a wonderful day, a wonderful week.
If I speak up sometimes, maybe I shouldn't.
Why shouldn't you? Of course you could. Why not? I like it. All of that Gimel Dalet going through all the way one way and this